Let's be clear, this isn't just about a protest that happened in Minneapolis. It's about a cold, calculated exercise in power. We're going to break down the moment the federal government decided to move in, betting that fear would do all the heavy lifting for them. And to really get it, we have to look back, way back, like 500 years. And that's exactly what happened, isn't it? Power just moved. This wasn't some messy reaction to chaos on the streets. No, this was a deliberate deployment. Federal agents from Donald Trump's ICE showed up in the city, masked, armed, and ready. So the real question we need to answer isn't just what they did, but why they chose this specific, really intimidating approach. So let's start with the first thing you need to know, something that often gets overlooked. Before a single shot was fired, before any tear gas, the most unsettling part of this whole thing was just the sheer scale of the operation. Over 3,000 federal agents. Now, to put that number into perspective for you, this force was way bigger than the city's own police department. So let's be really clear about what that means. This was never about just helping out local cops or controlling a crowd. This was, for all intents and purposes, an occupation. And that right there is the central puzzle. Why would a government act like an invading army against its own people? I mean, what's the goal? What purpose does that serve? To get to the answer, we have to dust off a much, much older and frankly a much more ruthless playbook. And this is where Niccolo Machiavelli enters the picture. But we're not going to treat him like some dusty old historical figure. No. For our purposes, we're going to use his work as a lens, a tool that gives us a brutal and, yeah, pretty uncomfortable clarity on what was happening. You know, Machiavelli famously argued that a ruler has to make a choice. Is it better to be loved or to be feared? Just look at the two columns here. Love, it relies on goodwill, it's fragile, you need people's consent. But fear, well, fear relies on arms. It's decisive, and it can be, as he put it, theatrical. It's pretty obvious the Trump administration made their choice. They chose fear. And that choice brings us to a core Machiavellian concept, exemplary violence. You see, the seemingly random use of pepper balls and flashbangs, that wasn't just chaos. It was strategic. The logic is simple, and it's chilling. You harm a few people out in the open, very publicly, so that many, many more people, watching from their homes, become too afraid to even think about stepping outside. This idea of no neutral observers was the next logical step in that strategy. When you start targeting journalists, targeting cameras, the message couldn't be clearer. You cannot just stand there and watch. You're either part of the silent, fearful crowd, or you're an enemy. A power that can't stand to be watched knows its own actions are indefensible. So how exactly was this atmosphere of fear created on the ground? Well, it wasn't just one single act. It was more like a machine, a self-perpetuating cycle. I mean, this loop right here explains everything. First, you deploy this absolutely overwhelming force. That show of force, of course, provokes outrage and a reaction from the public. And then, and this is the twisted genius of it, that very reaction is used as the justification for bringing in even more force. Each act of violence created its own excuse to exist. And the goal here, let's be honest, it was never order, it was submission. You could call it spectacle cruelty. The public provocations, the agents posturing, that wasn't about making arrests, it was psychological warfare. The whole point was to show that the state could go anywhere, do anything, and that nowhere was safe from its reach.
And it's so important to understand that this wasn't just for the people on the streets of Minneapolis. Oh no, these actions were designed as content, as a show for a national audience, all to feed a narrative of dominance. The pain being inflicted in real time became propaganda. The fear that was generated became content to be shared all across the country.
But here's the twist. Here's where the old playbook starts to fall apart. Because Machiavelli himself warns that cruelty, if you use it badly, if you mismanage it, it becomes self-destructive. It actually starts to reveal weakness, not strength. And this slide just lays out the stark contrast at the heart of the failure. The response was so completely disproportionate. You have chanting met with batons, snowballs met with chemical weapons, cameras met with pepper balls, that it became impossible for anyone watching to see it as legitimate. That kind of asymmetry doesn't create fear. It just destroys your credibility and radicalizes everyone who sees it. And this leads us to one of Machiavelli's most profound and kind of ironic observations. When people feel like they have nothing left to lose, when being obedient doesn't guarantee your safety anymore, intimidation just stops working. Fear, when you push it too far, it backfires. It creates its opposite, courage. So what was the actual result on the ground? Did the intimidation work? Not really. In fact, what grew was solidarity. People came together, and a deep, burning resentment toward that federal presence got stronger every day. The strategy actually achieved the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do.
The administration's refusal to de-escalate, to change tactics, it really revealed a critical flaw in their thinking. They were confusing being persistent with being strong. But as Machiavelli would tell you, real strength knows how to adapt. Just being stubborn, especially when your strategy is failing, is just a sign that you've run out of ideas.
And this brings us to what might be the most chilling part of this whole analysis. Minneapolis wasn't just a crisis that was mismanaged. It was a rehearsal. It was a test to see what was possible. Just look at this timeline. This is the path to normalization. And this is maybe the most dangerous part of all. An extreme action first creates outrage, but then it becomes a passing headline. Pretty soon, it's just a footnote in a history book. And then finally, it becomes a precedent, a tool that can be used again in the future. This is how the completely unacceptable slowly becomes normal. So we really have to see these events for what they were, a series of experiments. Power was basically asking questions, probing the limits of what people would tolerate. How much force can you use before there's a real backlash? How much of this can you hide if you have friendly media on your side? How many reporters can you hurt before the story changes? Ultimately, though, the whole strategy was exposed. The tactics, the logic behind it, the true intent, it was all laid bare for everyone to see. The machinery that was built to manufacture fear was put on full public display. And once you see how that machine works, you can't unsee it. And so that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. This entire strategy depended on fear actually working. But when that fear fails, when it morphs into courage and resentment, and when all your legitimacy has been completely burned away, well, power is left standing all by itself. And if history teaches us anything, it's that power that stands alone never stands for very long.